The Chicago Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup presents Accessibility for Everyone with Laura Kalbag, a co-hosted meetup with the Ottawa Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup.
Hello everyone, this is Laura doing a voice of God impression. I've recorded this in case the technology goes bad, and so hello from the Laura of the past, and let's get on with it. A blind customer couldn't use Winn-Dixie's website, so he sued them. Google Photos categorized photos of black friends as gorillas. Glow, the pregnancy app, exposed women's personal information. We build the new everyday things. We build things for shopping, we build things for photos, we build things for pregnancy. These are the new everyday things. The problem is in technology, we tend to build things for people just like us. It's always easier to create products for people who have the same needs as us and understand our own requirements and the reasons behind them better than anybody else. Many successful products are created when people scratch their own itch or eat their own dog food. However, we're largely people of similar ages, abilities, backgrounds, educational and financial statuses. We end up creating products for people just like us, whoever we are and whatever our needs are, forgetting that other people may have requirements that differ from our own or even conflict with our own. To create more useful, usable products, we need to understand and care about those differing needs. Empathy is one of the ways we can do this. Empathy is the ability to share the feelings of others. It's what makes us good at creating products for other people. We can better understand their problems and create solutions that fit their needs. Empathy is easier in diverse teams because of diversity. Diversity comes from a range of ages, abilities, ethnicities, socioeconomic classes, personal backgrounds, genders, educational levels, and many more characteristics that give us each a unique experience of the world. When we understand these problems for each other, we have a better capacity for solving problems as well. This happens through when we spend meaningful time with people whose experiences differ from our own. Having a diverse team can also prevent us from othering our audience, which is really important. I mean, have you ever heard of someone refer to their users or their clients as being stupid? It's easy to be dismissive of the people using our products if we think of them in us versus them terms. We don't want to treat the people who use our products as this other. This is particularly important when we're talking about diversity and accessibility, because this dictates how we look at people and their needs. When we talk about accessibility, for example, we're usually talking about how to make products work for people with disabilities. But often, actually, when we're talking about accessibility on the web, we frame it more specifically about screen reader accessibility. We use the term accessibility just to describe screen reader accessibility and not the way that accessibility can meet other needs. But we're designing for an audience who have that huge, wide range of needs, and that includes accessibility needs. And that's why using the terms like universal design or inclusive design are much more preferable in terms of approaches. And that's also why we should avoid the term user in favour of just person or human. It's far easier to respect someone when you call them a human or a person, just like you, rather than othering them using a term like user. So it's not user experience, it's experience design. And this language is very important because it defines how we communicate issues, and how we communicate issues with each other decides how we act upon them. Above all, we need to build meaningful products that serve people's needs and value their time. We need to also be cautious in assuming we know what's best for others. If we believe we know what's best for others despite our differing needs, this can result in fairly patronising and incorrect solutions. This is what we might sometimes refer to as colonial design. I know that's funny because I'm British. We need to design in a way that is useful, that is fit for purpose. We need this focus. Unless the content itself is accessible, nothing is accessible. That's why it's important to start with the content. Inclusive design for content often requires creating content for needs that are not necessarily the same as our own. And in order to understand each other's needs, and to understand other people's needs, we need to research and test our content with a diverse audience. This audience may not reflect who you consider to be your typical audience. Your existing audience may be limited to people who are already able to access your content. Your existing audience may exclude people because they've not actually been able to access your content up until this point. They may have needs you've not previously considered. An example of this is when I wrote my book, Accessibility for Everyone. I didn't think about what it would be like for people reading the book on e-readers. And so these images here, it shows on the right my book on an e-reader, and on the left it's a screenshot from the ebook as a PDF. And you can see at the top I've got these images that show some of the possible perceived differences between images based upon different forms of colour blindness. So if you have deuteranopia, the image may appear like the second kingfisher picture. If you have protanopia, it may appear as the middle one. And if you look at it on the e-reader, which is displaying everything in grayscale, which is common for the majority of e-readers, you can see there's barely a perceivable difference between any of those images. So what makes for inclusive content, besides considering people's needs? There are 4 broad parameters we need to consider. 1. Make it easy to see, accommodate those visual needs. 2. Make it easy to hear, accommodate auditory needs. 3. Make it easy to interact, accommodate motor needs. And 4. Make it easy to understand, accommodate cognitive needs. When we're creating inclusive content, generally the aim is to make all of our content accessible to as many people as possible. But sometimes it's just not possible. One specific format may not be accessible to a particular type of need. Those people might need a specific format in order to be able to access your content. This is when alternatives can be very valuable. So this is a really good example I found on Freelance TV. And for people who are blind or have impaired vision or cannot access the video as easily, they can read this really beautifully formatted transcript. It's a text version of the video content. I mean, it doesn't have the same imagery, but it has all of the text. It's far more accessible because we've provided that alternative. And you probably are already planning, writing and creating inclusive content, because many of the considerations you use to make your content readable and usable are the same. But now I've got some starting points for us to think about how we can make content in a more inclusive way. Use plain language. Plain language benefits everybody from people with dyslexia to non-native speakers. Put what you say as simply as possible. I think a really good example of this is the gov.uk site for the British government. They write sentences that are short and easy to read, which makes text far less intimidating and much easier to skim if you're just looking for information. The audience for your content might dictate how technical you need to be, but generally, if you avoid jargon and complex metaphors and things like that, that will make your content more welcome to people who are maybe new to the industry or people of all ages and abilities. Explain acronyms. If you use acronyms, explain their meaning alongside their first use. I found a really great example of this when I was looking at articles on SitePoint last week. This is by the wonderful Hugo Girardel, who I know considers accessibility in his work. And so this is a quote talking about how he writes SAS, or how he recommends you write SAS. And you can see here there's use of the word CLI, or the acronym CLI, which is a command line interface. But if you're like me and you have a poor memory for these things, or you just don't know what every acronym means. I didn't know what a CLI was till relatively recently. I'd seen it used a lot, but wasn't actually entirely sure what it meant. But because of how Hugo has written the text and then put the acronym in the brackets, I now know that CLI means command line interface. And so when he then goes on to write more about CLIs further down his article, I know what it means already because I read it near the top, so he can use the acronym in the text without having to explain it every time. It's also very important to explain acronyms in case the acronym is not what you expect it to be. Other things that CLI could mean might be a customer loyalty index or the cultural landscape inventory. Very different things, not at all relevant to SAS, but how are you to know that if there's no explanation? Use simple language and explain the context. So when someone runs text through a translation extension, it's far more likely to translate into something meaningful and understandable if you've used simple language and explained what you're talking about, rather than just assuming that people will know sort of your first sentence, they'll get what you mean. Don't expect anyone to get what you mean. Make sure you explain it well enough that they will truly understand you. Give your content a clear hierarchy and structure. A really great example of this is Wikipedia. It's not a particularly exciting design, but they do have clear headings, they have clear paragraphs, they have a contents list at the beginning of a page, so that you can jump to different headings. And we all like to think that our readers will pore over every little word we've written. Perhaps they'll keep a dictionary handy so that they can understand when we use particularly long and clever words. But really, in reality, the content we write for the web is usually being very quickly consumed. People are looking at it in a hurry or looking to pick out specific information. So we don't want to be thieves of their attention. We don't want to take up more time than we need to, especially if someone finds it difficult to read and they're struggling through your page. Why make that harder than you need to? And give your content a clear order. How we create a clear hierarchy really depends on the context of our content. It depends on the type of content that we're displaying. But usually ordering the most important information first is a straightforward way of giving our content good hierarchy. So again, back to gov.uk, I think it's a really good example of where they put the most important content first. If you're looking at a page on preparing to flood, chances are you want to know the information if you're about to be flooded right now. That's most important information to see first. Using headings to segment and label longer lengths of text is generally very beneficial. Wirecutter is a really good example of using headings to segment and to label. You see here, the best bike pump is a review of a bike pump. They have a list of contents near the top, so you know you can jump to why should you trust them, who is it for, how they picked it, how they tested it, their pick, their flaws, all of these things. And as you go down the page, these headings are very clearly delineated. They're really clearly set out, so you can see exactly where they are and where each section begins and ends. Headings aren't just a visual feature, they can also provide landmarks for assistive technology. if you are using semantically corresponding HTML. So if you're actually using headings, H1s, H2s, H3s in your text. So this is just an example of the Wirecutter, the document outline from it. This is using HTML5 outline, which is not a flawless way of doing it, but here you can see there's some untitled sections and untitled navigation, that's fine. But you can see very clearly what is a heading and what is a subheading. The best bike pump, our pick, the name of their pick. The runner-up, their pick, the reasons why it's the runner-up. Their upgrade pick, the name of that pick. Their research, why you should trust their research. All of these things very clearly marked out. Consider the language that you use in your links. This is such a big deal. Links are such a key part of the web, so we really need to consider the text we use in them. So here's an example. To get in contact with our team, click here. You can actually make this link even shorter. The click here is entirely redundant when you could just link the text itself. Get in contact with our team. No click here, easy to read, not as long. The important thing is that we don't always say click here. Screen readers and other assistive technology can often read the links on a page outside of the text itself, so that somebody using it can jump between the links on a page, because links are often very useful landmarks. So it's vital that that link text makes as much sense as it can without the surrounding text. Without context, a list of links could just end up being here, here, click here, click here, click here, giving the listeners no idea of where those links might lead. Alternative content formats are so beneficial for people who cannot access your primary content format. I'll give you some examples to make that a bit clearer. But it also could give more options to people who just prefer a different format of content. We all have our own preferences for how we like to consume things. One of the simplest ways of meeting a range of accessibility needs is to provide a text alternative to image, video, and audio content. The most obvious of this being the alternative text attribute for images. You probably know about this already, but maybe you don't, and I'm hoping that a little bit of this will help you in the future. So the most basic thing is this. Here I've got the image HTML written out. You have the source, the file that the image refers to, and the alternative attribute, which is just alt equals, and then the description of the image between quote tags. So when the alt attribute is provided for that image, it gives the browser a fallback in case the image can't be seen. The image might not be seen because the site visitor is not cited or partially cited, or it could be a situation where it's email, and often email doesn't allow images to load because so often images are used in order to track people reading their emails. And so here's a really good example of how The Economist, it's a spam email, but it's still provided good fallbacks in it. So on the left is the version before I allowed the images to load, and on the right is the version after I allowed the images to load. So on the left you can see that there's a space for the Economist logo, and what they've done is they've provided alternative text in the form of just the words The Economist, because the logo says The Economist. And so that falls back quite nice and tidily, you can just see the text. What they've also done is they've used a sprite for their claim your free copy kind of button area, and this is clearly using tables. The sprite doesn't work completely when the images do load, but the main focus of that area is a red background with white text. And so they've actually made that happen in the table itself before the text is loaded, so that's quite a nice fallback as well. Writing meaningful alternative text, the stuff that's actually in those description in the quote, is really important. just because not everybody will read it, because of course not everybody will see it, it doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention to this bit of microcopy. And of course, also really useful for search engine indexing, because search engines can't yet interpret the content of images particularly well, but it can very much read the text alternative. So if all you could see is the text that says, photo of my dog, what's the point in me sharing that image? You don't know what makes that photo of my dog notable. But if you saw the text, my dog lying on the bedroom floor with his whole body visible but his head completely obscured under the bed, you kind of get a better idea of why I included that image in the first place. It's because my dog looks silly. And we don't need alternative text for decorative images. What we do with that is to leave the alternative attribute empty for these images. What this will do is mean that there's no text shown in place of that image. Screen readers and other assistive technology will just ignore that image completely. So you put the alt attribute in there, but you leave the contents of the quote tags empty. A really good place to hone your craft of alternative text, whilst also trying to make what you do more inclusive, is on Twitter. In your Twitter account's accessibility settings, you can turn on this compose image description setting. It's a bit of a faff finding it. You have to go to your account settings, go to accessibility, and then go and turn it on. But once you do, whenever you upload an image, it will come with this little add description section. So once you click that, it will give you the option to describe this photo for the visually impaired. And I like it because you get to see a nice big copy of the image at the same time, which means you can better describe what you see there. Of course, Mastodon, which is the friendly Twitter alternative, actually includes the option to compose an image description by default. So it's not a setting you have to turn on. It's always there, which I think is a great way of encouraging people to be more inclusive with their images. Text alternatives are also valuable for other kinds of visual content, such as infographics or graphs, which don't always have a sort of an obvious fallback. So this kind of information laid out like this is very hard to present in text, and it's not really the kind of thing you can describe in one line of text. So what could the text describing this infographic actually look like? Do we really want to just do a data dump? Particularly with more complex infographics, that's not really helpful. I mean, this is a table of the data that's in that infographic, which is very simple. It's got 3 columns and 8 rows, and can you really tell what the point of the infographic is? Because it's not really the equivalent. The data text is not the equivalent of an infographic. We choose to use infographics or graphs to tell a narrative, to draw attention to particular patterns and provide more insight than just the raw data. And so why not try to do that when we're planning text alternatives? So explain what is notable, what is relevant about the patterns and the visualizations. So here I've written a text alternative for this infographic. The infographic shows how public awareness of social cooling has increased since the Snowdon leaks in 2013. I mean, maybe I could also include about the earlier notable flags as well. That's also something to consider. We need to create transcripts for video and audio content. I feel like people are starting to cotton on to this a bit more lately. Transcripts are long-form text versions of equivalents of audio or video. So this is a nice example that I found This American Life. Although it does say transcripts are generated using a combination of speech recognition software and human transcribers and may contain errors. Please check the corresponding audio before quoting in print. So this transcript is not particularly designed for accessibility, but it's a transcript nonetheless. It exists. The thing is that transcripts can be more. They can be juicier forms of text, because while they make audio content accessible to people who can't hear audio, they can be a very valuable alternative for anyone who wants to just skip through the content to find the bits that interest them the most. So here's a really beneficial transcript I found. I think I showed this to you earlier, where transcripts can be really valuable when they add additional formatting to give that text structure and hierarchy. Like this example from Freelance TV, they label different speakers to make it clear in the transcript text who is speaking. That can actually provide more clarity than the audio itself, because if the interviewer has a very similar voice to the person they're interviewing, that can be quite confusing. Transcripts can even go further and add things like headings in the text so that to help people find their way through, or other things. This Freakonomics example on their podcast, they actually link references from the text, so that's another bonus that you get that you don't necessarily get in the audio content itself. We need to use captions or subtitles for video content. So this is an example of how subtitles might appear on a Vimeo video. Subtitles are lines of text that are transcriptions or translations of the speech on the screen. Often I still find it hard to remember the difference between subtitles and captions, but closed captions are similar to subtitles, except they include oral information such as sound or music that is not speech. So things that you can hear in the video or audio that provides additional information. So this is a little example I found on a video on Vimeo where it just says snapping when there's a snapping sound in the video. And both captions and subtitles are very useful as a text alternative, particularly to people who are hearing impaired or deaf. Producing captions and subtitles can be pretty time consuming, especially compared to transcripts, because you're specifically timing the text that you're writing to points in the video or audio so that they show up at the correct point over the screen. But there are free tools, so it's not expensive in terms of the software you have to buy. Joomla, this is the one that you can see here, that makes it relatively inexpensive to produce because the software itself is free, so really the expense is your time. An alternative is the auto captioning. So that's where some video platforms, and particularly YouTube, will allow you, when you upload a video, it will auto caption it for you. However, it can be pretty bad. This is an example of an auto captioning from a talk I did a couple of years ago, where I was using the word advertisers all the way through, and YouTube captioned it as appetizers. Pretty much changes the meaning of the content there, and quite ironic given that this is on YouTube. It usually takes me, I'd say, roughly 3 times as long as the length of the video or the audio to produce captions for it, or even actually maybe similar for a transcript, maybe twice as long for a transcript and 3 times as long for captions. But that time investment is always worthwhile. Captions are even actually being used more for things like social media, because videos play without their sound by default. So videos come up on mute, and so even for things like ads, they want you to know what's being said in order to draw you in. So these are 2 examples. The example on the left is from a news channel, their tweets. So they caption all of their videos so that people can watch them without sound. And on the right is quite different, and that's an ad on Facebook, but they're using captions in order for you to know what's going on without playing the sound on the video. So I hope I'm convincing you that good accessibility is good usability. But this brings me to that kind of slightly thornier topic. When we look at accessible design today, we're often faced with that myth that accessible websites can't be beautiful. And this is one of the things I wrote in my talk description. I have this kind of question, is it sort of true? No, it's not really. But I think that when people are trying to learn about accessibility, the sites that they're looking at in order to learn about accessibility are frequently maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing sites. So it leads them to make this conclusion that accessible websites are ugly. I think it's more of an issue that websites about accessibility are often not accessible to those outside of the accessibility community. The thing is, aesthetics are part of usability, and thus they are part of accessibility too. Aesthetics as design, of course, and not merely as decorative stuff, and we'll look at that a bit more later. Because the thing is, ugly design is not accessible design, because ugly design is not usable. We have to acknowledge when we're building digital products or websites, we're not making art. We don't need to make things wacky just for the sake of being different. I mean, one thing that I sure know is we don't need disruption for the sake of disruption. Disruption is used as a positive word for some reason in the tech industry. It is not a positive thing. We do not need to disrupt everything. And we should also think about how we define beauty. I mean, our sites aren't supposed to be works of art. Should the beauty really come through the simplicity and the thoughtful aesthetic decisions that help our interfaces do the job they're designed to do? So these are some aesthetic principles I've come up with from the perspective of creating functional interfaces that look good because they're inviting, because they're appealing, because they're easy to understand. This is particularly important for people with cognitive impairments, people who are neurodiverse, people who have dyslexia, people who are even colorblind, for people who have issues with motion in interfaces. It will also be valuable to people who are newer to technology and aren't yet particularly aware of established conventions. We need to have interfaces presented where you understand what is the purpose. What is the purpose of this thing in front of me? What can I actually do with it? How do I use it? And what happens when I use it? These are all the things we need to make clear through our design. And one of the key parts of this, one of the key tools we can use is affordances. Those visual cues that help you understand how something is supposed to be used. So here's an example of some affordances. Examples of things we might be able to press on a page. So how do we know which of these bits of text we can press and which of these are just something to be looked at and not touched? We should use buttons for buttons and use links for links. This is something that really winds me up. We see this, we see a button, we expect a button to execute an action, we expect a button to make something happen. When you see this, you see a link, you expect it to take you somewhere. We shouldn't be messing these about. Interfaces shouldn't be surprising. Yeah, sometimes a button will both execute an action and take you to the next step, but the nuances between those two are not so many. Interfaces shouldn't surprise you. And if interfaces are surprising, it makes it really difficult for people with cognitive difficulties. Or even people who just think differently from you, who don't expect the same things that you expect. Convention is really valuable for this too. They're there for a reason, the conventions we use in design. They're easy to understand, and thus they are easy to use. It is very unlikely you're going to be the person who invents that next convention. So I would suggest you just stick with those that already exist. We don't need to be different for the sake of being different. It's the same as what I was saying earlier about we don't need to disrupt for the sake of disruption. This is a part of designing for purpose. We are not showing off. This is not about your ego. This is not about how you look to your friends. This is about how you serve the people who are using your products. So this is an example of navigation along the top of a page. It's a very common convention, so I found a whole load of examples of it very easily in just my most recently visited sites. But we also need to be aware that we shouldn't just do it. We shouldn't just use a particular convention because everybody else does it. One of the ones I hate the most is this stupid asterisk. Why do we use a red asterisk next to a form field in order to explain that that is a required field? It makes no sense. How does anyone who hasn't used a form before, or hasn't used your form before, know that's what it means until they've filled the wrong thing out or they've skipped the wrong form field? Relationships in design is something very important too. If we go back to this example of affordances and different things, how do we know what we can press and what we can't press? Well, part of that is actually the difference between the items, the relationship between the items. If there's some text that is just plain text, and then there's some text with an underline, then you are more likely to reason that the text with the underline is the link, and the text without is not a link. The same with how do you know that the bold text is different from the bold text with a green box around it? Well, when you see those two alongside each other, maybe you would reason that the bold text with the box around it is a button, is something you can interact with, and the ordinary bold text may just be a heading. The similarity and the contrast between these items is what provides information. It may not necessarily be something you consciously think about, but it's something that we work out. Layout. This is also very important for helping people understand the content on your pages. We can use space to make content relationships clear. So here's an example of a very ordinary kind of site. This is a news site. They have a header. All of their other content is grouped underneath the header. That's a convention. You have the primary content at the top and in the middle. Secondary content pushed a little to the side. And on the left, you have a contextual menu, a menu that applies to the primary content. So you know that it's relevant to that content because whilst it's only icons, it's alongside that content. And space too is important for this. It's really difficult to read something when there is so much going on in your peripheral vision, when there's so much around what you're trying to read or what you're trying to look at. Giving space or removing space is also a way that you can help people understand the relationships between the elements. And remember, the screen space we have, particularly on the web, is infinite. So we can use it. We don't need to overcrowd. We don't need to create distraction. We don't need to make elements compete with each other and make it harder to focus. Don't underestimate the power of a single column layout. If it works on mobile devices, why shouldn't it work on desktop? Why make people think outside of the linear if you don't need to? And very importantly, when we come to the world of flexbox and grid layouts, we need to ensure that the layout order reflects the content order. So this is particularly important for people who are using keyboard navigation. So imagine you have a set of boxes here, and they each represent different content, A, B, and C. With Flexbox or with Grid, you might decide that you want a different layout. You might want C, A, and B. You might want to have that sidebar text, maybe C as a sidebar, and you want it on the left rather than on the right. That's great, but think about how someone using keyboard navigation might use that. So if you're using keyboard navigation, you might skip A to B to C if you're tabbing through the interface. But if you use tabs and tabbing follows the source order, on the next example where Flexbox or Grid has been used to shift it about, you'll go from C to B to A. That's not right. It should be A to B to C. Anyway, it will be the wrong order. I'll fix that. What if the second item, what if the C is actually placed somewhere off the screen? And you'll tab to it, but you can't actually see the visual relationship between it. Width is another important thing. Line length, considering the readability of your typography, and arrange your line lengths accordingly. This is very difficult to read because the lines are very long. You actually might find yourself actively turning your head in order to read from the beginning of the line to the end of the line and then back to the beginning of the next line. It's not comfortable reading. If you just curb your line lengths a little, and some people think that you should have a certain amount of characters per line length, but really it depends on the size of the font, the size of the lowercase letters in your font, the space between the lines. This will all, you have to balance all of these in order to make it a comfortable reading width. But this is all part of typography. It's not just aesthetic typography. You should really choose your typefaces according to readability first. I mean, most web-safe fonts, those that are available on the majority of computers, are generally fairly readable. But what you should really avoid is just picking fonts because they look cool. Look at the actual letters inside your fonts and see how they compare. So this on the left is Heinemann, and this on the right is Georgia. You can see that the way that they portray the letters are very different. Partly because Heinemann is a sans serif and Georgia is a serif font, but also that Heinemann was deliberately designed to mimic the way in which we draw letters when we're learning what letter forms are. And so this can be particularly useful for people who are lower literacy or for people who find reading very difficult, to have letters that are more familiar to them, that may be more present in the kinds of text they usually read, compared to the slightly fancier serif fonts. We also need to bear in mind that small isn't tidy, it's just small. This is a really common issue with visual designers, because they want their text to look neat and tidy in their layouts. But as you can see from this example, if your text is too small to read, there's no point in it being there. I mean, yeah, it looks all nice and tidy, it forms a lovely little rectangle in the middle of your screen. But it's tiny. You can't read it. What's the point? And don't prevent font resizing. That's a very straightforward one, but very important. Just whatever you do, make sure that you don't prevent it. Consider the weights of your fonts, because font weights have a huge impact on the readability. Light weights, that very thin text, it might be crisp and pretty on a high definition screen, but it really lacks contrast. You need high contrast to make your text readable, but bear in mind you might also want a difference. You might also want a difference in weight between headings and body text. You might want a difference in weight when you have the use of strong HTML in there, sort of to imply a sort of a strong way for a word to be spoken. And height too. You might have chosen a functional typeface choice and a good size, but if your line height is too tight or too loose, it will make it very difficult to read. And so this is a very tight line height. This is where the space between the lines is very little. It's actually the height of the line is the equivalent of 80% of the font size. That's why it almost looks like the bottoms of the letters and the tops of the letters are bashing into each other. This is 150% of the font size. There's so much space between each line, it's actually quite difficult to read because it's hard to make the association between the end of one line and the beginning of the next. It's a bigger jump between the two. Roughly, generally, I find I prefer somewhere between 110% and 120% difference between the font size and the line height. But I like quite roomy lines. Other people do prefer it a little bit tighter. And don't use icon fonts on the web unless you're willing to progressively enhance the life out of them. Because you've got to do a lot of work in order to make that not just accessible but to screen readers, but also not just fill the page with unnecessary junk and kind of random text just for the sake of pretty icons. So that's me having a little drink. Colour. Colour is so valuable, but it should not be a crutch that we rely upon. Particularly, we don't want to use colour as a sole means to convey information. This is particularly important when you come to errors in forms and things like that. So here is an example. You look at this text in grayscale. It's barely any difference, the red and what was the light green text. So it would be no use whatsoever if you conveying that by itself. If you think perhaps, as you know, when text is underlined and coloured red when you've got a spelling error or a typo. See, with the underline, you can tell what that is, but the text colour alone wasn't much help. Colour contrast. This example will show how important it is to use a high contrast between your background colour and your foreground text. This is really important so that it's readable by people with different visual needs. So the obvious example is people who are colourblind, who might not perceive such a difference between two different colours, but also for people who just have a lack of clarity in their vision. People who are long-sighted or short-sighted and find the text harder to read, they'll also find it harder to distinguish those colours. So, I mean, depending on how good the screen is and how good the projector is, this might be readable for you, but chances are it won't be, because the contrast between the text colour and the background colour is very low. One of the best recommendations I ever heard was to test your designs in grayscale, and this is something that Jerry Cody taught me, and this is an example of a site that she designed for Simply Accessible, and they designed with the team there. And you can see this is beautiful. It's got so much colour, it's got so much life, but it's still very readable when it's in grayscale. And I think this is a great example to point out that you still have room for creativity when you're designing accessible sites. It doesn't mean not being creative. In fact, if anything, you need to be more creative in order to build things that are both functional and usable and appealing to people, that make them want to read it, that draw them in. And I think these are fairly simple principles that give you a lot of space. I think Limbo, this site that's quite new, it's a really cool job site. They care about accessibility, and I mean, it's not perfect. There's a little bit of small text there. The red could be slightly low contrast on that small text, but this is a beautiful site, and it's generally really accessible for people with lots of different needs. And they're iterating on this. And one of the things I love about Limbo's approach is the team know they're not going to hit perfect for accessibility on their first try. There's no such thing as perfect. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try, and keep trying and iterating and making things better. We're entering an era where we can distinguish ourselves and our products and our services on the fact that we actually care about each other. And it can be a little bit intimidating understanding the potential impact of our work, because many of us actually join the industry for different potential reasons. We joined the industry because of its exciting new shiny technologies, or because it democratized information, or because the work that we created could have such a huge reach across the internet. It didn't necessarily mean we signed up to be the people who build these new everyday things. But we are. If you look at roads, I think this is a good thing to compare it to. The people who design and build roads, what are all the things they have to consider? The design of a road, how it fits into its environment, is it designed safely? The geological properties of what is built, how people might use the roads. You wouldn't want to use a road where they didn't consider these things. You wouldn't want to use a road where they didn't consider your needs. And I think another place where roads are similar is that the people who build roads are also people who design a thing and build that thing, but also use that thing. So we both have an inbuilt understanding of how what we build will be used. And this is one of the reasons why we wrote the Ethical Design Manifesto. We've been thinking a lot about how to build ethical technologies. And we decided if we're building the new everyday things, we need a manifesto to help us frame our ethical approaches. So think of a product, a project, or business or something, as if it's an apple. The core of a product should be decentralized, private, open, interoperable, sustainable, and inclusive. Because this respects human rights. This is a very strong core for our apple. Once we have a good core, we can work on the edible bit, the flesh of our product. The thing that makes our product functional, convenient, and reliable. This is what most of us are very good at when we're building technology. This also respects human effort. We're generally pretty good at that. And then we can layer the delight on top, making products that are delightful experiences, because that respects human experience. And when we respect human rights and human effort and human experience, we call this the 3 R's of ethical design. However, many of the modern products that we see, that we use, that we even build, do not respect human rights. They might look beautiful and tasty on the outside, but on the inside the core is rotten. The appearance is just superficial. It might look tasty but on the outside, but you don't want to eat the inside of that apple. These are, I'm afraid to say, often Silicon Valley products. They use decoration to make their true design and their true intentions palatable. They make it very pretty, but it's not design, it is just decorative. So if you want to find out more about the Ethical Design Manifesto, you can go to our website, ind.ie/ethical design, where we go into that in more detail. But one of the key things I need you to understand is that rotten fruit is burdensome to its creators. Unethical products are burdensome to their creators. If we build products that are unethical, they might be centralized, invasive, they're not secure, they're proprietary, they're closed, they're unsustainable, and they're not accessible. They become a burden to us. What happens when you build things that aren't accessible? If you sell rotten fruit, people will eventually complain. We remember these examples we saw earlier. These are all rotten fruit. We need to be ethical. The point of the products we build is important. We need to build ethical products and services for our own future, for us as individuals, for us to benefit society as a whole. The thing is, it's not always illegal to be unethical. When we look at our road comparison, it's actually probably illegal to build roads that don't take safety, do not take design into account. But it's not necessarily illegal to build unethical technology. It's not illegal to build inaccessible products in many areas. But roads have been around for thousands of years. We've iterated over them. We've mostly standardized them to suit the requirements of different types of pedestrians, different vehicle users. We keep iterating over the production of roads with better designs and better, more sustainable materials. We need to do this with technology. I mean, it's early days with technology, but we've already gone too far. We're kind of iterating. We're having in Europe and to some degree in the US, but maybe less so. There's regulation, there's lawsuits and things like that. But there aren't that many laws and precedents that dictate how we should build technology, and that's why we need an ethical structure, an ethical framework. That's why we need to do this for ourselves. We need to build these things for our own sake. Build it for your future self, who may have different needs, who may be vulnerable in a different way from how you are now. I care about all of this stuff, and I want people to build ethical products, so this is why I wrote a book. And it was published in September by A Book Apart, and it's called Accessibility for Everyone. And of course, the folks here or those of you who are on the internet, those of you who are in different locations, you can use Ali Shih to get 15% off accessibility for everyone at abookapart.com. I have no idea whether I pronounced that correctly, but I'm going with Ali Shih for now. Let's make a better web. Let's get going.
Alrighty, so see if I can not mess this up.
Finally, sorry.
Hey, hello.
So, you had your questions?
Yes. Hello. Mana.
There we go.
Hi. My name is Alvaro here in Ottawa. So when you were talking about the alt texts, one of the things I was thinking about is how do you add the notion of emotional cues to the alt tags? Because if you have, like, I mean, even if you have the sound like in the closed captioning, it seems like it might still seem a little bit flat. So have you given much thought around, how do we convey some of the cues that may be lost with doing things just in text?
So you're talking about in captions and subtitles?
Yeah, like when you describe
alternative text as in images.
Well, when you describe the dog lying under the blankets, if the kind of, I'm thinking of like Imgur, right? So if the underlying kind of emotion is, it's like, oh, isn't that cute? But all I read is, it's a dog lying under a blanket. I'm thinking, okay, well, so, but, so you may miss some of that, like the key factor, I guess, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
That's the same in a lot of the text content that we write generally. We try to write things that have more emotion.
Ottawa, when someone's responding, you're gonna have to mute your mic, otherwise we're gonna get a feedback loop on all sides.
Far left top bar.
Okay, you're good now.
Okay, go ahead, Laura.
Okay, so this is actually just a general copy problem as well. When we're writing copy for about pages, when we're writing copy, when we're trying to introduce ourselves, we try to insert emotion in that way too. So I think that it's really an exercise in how we can do that. I mean, I probably didn't do the best example with the dog photo because it wasn't as funny as it could be. But that's something that I need to keep working on, that I need to keep practicing, is how can I convey that as well as I can in text. Yeah, some things might just not translate as well. Sometimes the joke is very visual, but at least you're not leaving people out or excluding them from the joke entirely. One of the examples I give is I had a tweet go viral on Twitter, and it was a really stupid, as they call, dad joke. I found a photo of a packet of spinach called teen spinach, and I wrote, smells like ... photo of teen spinach. Stupid joke. I hadn't added any alternative text then. I didn't know about adding accessibility features on Twitter, and I had someone send me a message going, actually funny about that joke because I can't see the image, so I don't know what the joke is. It isn't just a case about trying to, yes, we want to make it as emotional, as involved as possible, but sometimes it's just as much as not excluding people.
Okay, Ottawa, any other questions?
Any more questions? So this is Mike, and I had a question about your experience not developing for individual sites, but you've also built large projects like Indie. And what was your experience trying to go off and to build for a more generalized implementation rather than for a specific website? So when you're building software that's going to be used in multiple contexts and where you're not necessarily going to be able to control how or how a user is going to be using a particular piece of software. Generalizing software and accessibility, how do you try and work towards that? There's things that you can't necessarily, if you're building a specific site, you have control and knowledge of how that is going to be implemented, who the users are, what the context is, but you don't when you're building the bigger the infrastructure is, the less you know about your users. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I think that also applies to when you're working for a very small organization and you may not have so many resources in order to test with the widest range of people possible or research with the widest range of people possible. And one of the things I try to do is, in designing inclusively, you're trying to continually think about how people might use this differently from you, but also how can you make this the simplest thing you can possible? How do I distill this down to its absolute purpose? Because a lot of the time, the ways in which we make things less usable is by adding all of these additional frills and sort of fancy features that aren't necessary and aren't valuable to the purpose of our product. And then the key thing is to have as open a dialogue as possible in order to allow people to tell you when you're going wrong. And when people tell you you are going wrong or have done something that it doesn't work for them, or one of the examples with what we build for Indie is we have an app where we display web pages inside of a native app. And what web pages can do is resize depending upon the text on iOS, can resize so that it fits the user's size preferences for their device. But we hadn't done that because I assumed that it would just be done automatically and never assume something. And so when someone said, oh, could you make this so that it works with dynamic text so it matches my text preferences on my device, rather than saying, oh, being all defensive, oh, we don't know about that, we don't want to look at that. What we do is we say, oh, of course, yeah, we've got actual real people that we know here are having a problem with what we built, and we can fix that problem pretty easily. To do it is to make sure that you're as open as possible to iterating as you go, never considering what you've built as the final polished product, and always improving it and always working on listening to people and improving it for their needs.
Okay, I want to open it up to the folks here in Chicago. Does anyone here have any questions for Laura? And what I'll ask you to do is tell me, and then I'll sit, because the microphone's a little weak here. So, okay, go ahead.
She mentioned CSS and Flexbox. I guess comparatively, is Flexbox more or less accessible versus, say, Float?
So the question is, and keep me honest, with regards to CSS Flexbox, is it more or less accessible compared to other layout methods like floats and such?
I think if you compare it to something like absolute positioning, then it could be the same, because it's about how much you take an element out of its natural flow. I mean, with things like floats positioning, you can't take things very far out of their source order without being really hacky. But I would say that generally, I think that things like Flexbox by default have the potential to be far more accessible, because they are stopping you from adding a lot of additional markup. You don't need that extra markup in order to lay things out in a particular way anymore. And so I think that you're more likely to write meaningful HTML that reflects the content itself. And really, it's more a case of, if you're going to start doing things like changing the entire order of your page, because you can with Flexbox, rather than changing the entire order and laying something out, that you change, if the order is going to be different, you actually change that order in the source itself and continue laying it out in Flexbox or Grid or something similar to that. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great.
Any other questions here from Chicago? Okay, Laura, I think you did too good of a job. There's no questions here. Let me open it up to.
Well, I'm always on Twitter and things like that as well.
I know. Ottawa, any other questions? One more question from your side?
We got lots of questions.
Hi, me again. So it's just more of like, I guess almost like an interesting case. So there's an app out there called Be My Eyes. I don't know if you're aware of it, but so for those of you that don't know it, essentially you sign up as a sighted person, and basically people with blind people sign up as well. And if they need help with like odd things like figuring out which color sweater they should have, or help picking out a different kind of mustard from the fridge, they use the app with their phone, and you're essentially their eyes, and you tell them which product to choose. One of the ones that I did recently was a blind person basically wanted to know, they wanted to have a stout beer, and from their fridge they couldn't tell which one was which. So they said, which one of these is the stout? And they had 3 beers in a row, and it's like, oh, it's the middle one. And it's like, okay, great, thank you. And I thought, how funny is that? That it's like we think of accessibility essentially, being in our various kind of rectangles, but it's really, if it's out in the world, it's the little things that we take for granted, such as which beer to choose if you have 3 of them in the fridge, and then suddenly we have the ability, like through our phones or whatnot, to almost be like that human API, where we can actually go in and be the eyes for somebody. So it was more of a comment than a question.
I think that kind of thing is great, and actually I think that's a really good exercise we can use for people who maybe don't understand the value of accessibility or the value of inclusive design and why we're doing it. And showing them something like that can really empower them, understanding the impact of what they're building and understand how they can really make a difference to someone, because that's one of the hardest issues we really have working in accessibility, is how do we convince other people to care about it? Because to most of us, it may seem it's straightforward, it's caring about people. But actually, if you don't have experience, if you haven't got needs yourself, or you haven't had experience with a friend or family member that has particular needs that makes using web difficult, maybe you don't know. Maybe you're not able to empathize with people in that situation so well. I think it's a really great example.
Okay, final question from either Ottawa or Chicago. Oh, we got a question here. 1 second. Yes.
So, Laura, where do you feel accessibility is going to go in the future with advances in technologies revolving around virtual reality and augmented reality?
So, Laura, where do you think accessibility is headed with the latest technologies such as augmented reality and virtual reality?
Okay, I think this is really interesting. I think it could be very, very positive. It could be really impactful, particularly if there are algorithms that help people, like the example of the app that you have someone helping you tell you what's in front of you. You could have that done by image recognition and through algorithms and things like that that allow you to work that kind of thing out. The important thing that we should actually think about here is information and who is tracking that information. Because actually I think that the key issue in that, while it could be very positive from an accessibility point of view, we have to think about what companies are actually doing with this knowledge about what we're pointing our devices at. What kind of situations are we in? Is that something that's private to us? Is that data being organization against us? So I actually think that it brings up, it's incredibly positive in terms of how it can go. There are already apps coming out that are using things like augmented reality and an AI in order to do things like that. But we have to think about the implications for the users as well.
Okay, I'm just checking to see if there's a question on the interwebs here. Going once, going twice. Okay. Before I let Laura go, you guys do realize in Chicago, it's 7 hours ahead of this time. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. So I really want to give Laura a round of applause. Because I know
I appreciate you all come out.
Oh yes, and I know I'm normally in the middle of my second dream by this time. So we want to give away a copy of Accessibility for Everyone. And we have a list of people here. We have a list of people in Ottawa. I almost said Montreal. I'm sure they'd kick me in the shins for that. You're going to do the draw. Okay. So, and I don't know where this person is. So, you know, stand up, jump up and down, either in Ottawa or Chicago. Rachel Sinnen. Do we have a Rachel Sinnen? Okay, moving on to the next name. Marta Snyder. I'm looking at Ottawa here. Marta Snyder? No? Okay. Great, we like that. We like that. Okay, next. We could be here a while. Keisha Green.
Yes.
Yes! Chicago gets it.
Hey.
I will give you a copy of Laura's ebook. I want to thank everyone in Ottawa, everyone in Chicago for attending, and definitely I want to thank you, Laura, for all the work you did to put this presentation together. Greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks to tonight's presenter, Laura Kalbag. Visit her online at laurakalbag.com or ind.e. You can follow her on Twitter at Laura Kalbag or Indie or Better Blocker. Thanks to our venue sponsor, Red Shelf. Visit them online at redshelf.com. Thanks for our live captions, provided by ACS, Alternative Communication Services. Visit them online at acscaptions.com. Live captions are sponsored by McDonald's. We're loving it. Thanks to our generous sponsor, Sticker Giant. Visit them online for all your sticker needs at stickergiant.com. Thanks to our generous sponsor, Rosenfeld. Get 20% off really great books. Use code A11YCHI at rosenfeldmedia.com. This has been a production of the Chicago Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup. You can watch recordings from past meetups at meetup by going to YouTube at A11YCHI.gl. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/A11YCHI, lowercase p e.